Good evening and welcome to Law Talk, the show that brings the law, current events, and the Constitution into your home each month. Mark, I know we have some great subjects tonight. What's our first subject?
Well, Jim, we're talking about the election, the presidential election, and the winner is Obama.
Well, you know that the vast majority of the media had actually predicted that the president would be reelected because his philosophies and his programs have seemed to catch the majority of Americans today. Now, what's your opinion on that?
Well, I would say that we're looking at this and we want to make possibly some predictions of what a second term is going to look like.
And what kind of predictions are we talking about?
Well, let's talk about taxes. Okay, now I would think President Obama would like to increase taxes.
My understanding is that he wants to allow the Bush tax cuts, which have actually protected the vast majority of taxpayers in the country, to expire on January 1st. I also understand that because of the campaign starting almost 2 years ago when he first started, running for election, he had always indicated that he wants to tax the rich, the top 1%, the millionaires and billionaires. He wants them to pay for all the services of the people that can't afford to live. So what do you know about that?
Well, I think that, Trump was making a speech yesterday, and the 1% has become 2%. I think the billionaires have become millionaires, and the millionaires are now 250,000 or 200,000. When it comes down to it, I think the rich are going to be anyone really who has a job.
Well, actually, when they reinstate the employment taxes, the employee tax, which they froze for a while, that's going to be an automatic tax on anyone that has a W-2 type paycheck. So that's going to affect everybody.
So basically, if you have a job, you're kind of like a millionaire or a billionaire, in a way.
Well, what's interesting is, in this day and age, earning $250,000, by the way, that's by couple. Right. That's not by an individual.
Right.
$250,000 after taxes is nowhere near $250,000. And if you even want to be able to have a home, $250,000 doesn't really buy you a home for a couple. And so when he's talking about taxing the rich, who is really the rich?
Well, I'm saying, it's kind of been changed. First it was millionaires, billionaires, then it was 250,000, now it's 200,000, and the percentages keep changing. But really, if you're going to raise taxes, you have to raise taxes on the middle class. There's just not enough rich people to really pay for everything.
Well, in fact, the fact is the so-called rich, the top 10%, don't they pay like 65% of all the taxes right now? And so when you go to the top 25%, I'm under the impression that's about 90% of the taxes. So if you have that small percentage left to tax more, is there even enough money if they gave 100% of their income to pay off the national debt?
Wouldn't last long.
Yeah, I understand it's only a matter of a 3-month period. If they taxed everyone on 100% that earns more than $250,000, it wouldn't even last 3 months. 3 months of the annual debt that's being generated by the current administration.
Well, usually when you do a wealth distribution, in most countries that have done it, the rich gets, unless they're politically not connected. Usually the rich who are politically connected stages as rich. The rich are not quite as well politically connected, get a little less rich. The middle class gets a lot poor, and usually the lower class gets incredibly poor. So that's usually what happens when they do these redistribution schemes.
So do you believe, I'm going to ask you for prediction, Mark, do you believe on January 1st we're going to have the effective cliff, the car will drive over the cliff, they'll eliminate the Bush tax cuts, which effectively have protected the majority of all earners, and allow that to go, and then have a financial crisis, a second depression?
I don't know. I mean, it's really going to be a showdown. I mean, there's a fiscal cliff, which means there's going to be the tax cuts, and then there's some spending cuts, or maybe they'll negotiate something out. I think that there's a good chance they might have the fiscal cliff. Yeah.
Okay, so what else besides taxes are going to be another hallmark of the second 4 years of the president?
So who knows what's going to happen? But there will be, raising taxes. There will be some redistribution, and usually what that happens is that, like you said, voting is your best revenge there. So, the rich will get slightly less rich unless they're politically connected. Energy dependence.
Well,
that'll change quite a bit.
Yeah, we know the current administration believes in the green agenda. That's who a lot of their money comes from. And under the green agenda, that means to restrict coal, restrict drilling, restrict nuclear, and wind and solar. hot topics for the environmentalists is the only thing that's really going to be pushed. Is that correct?
Well, no, you have wind, solar, and wood.
Oh, wood.
Yeah, and wood. And out of that, that's about 1% or 2 or 3% of total energy production. Most of it's wood.
So where's the rest going to come from?
More wood, I guess. More, you have to burn a lot of wood.
Are we going to deforest all of Canada over this?
Well, what's interesting is they talk about electric cars. Well, that's mostly run on coal, right?
On coal.
Yeah. So any way you look at it, I guess that's going to be, be burning a lot of wood.
Well, actually, there's something that goes hand in hand with coal, oil, and natural gas that they've tried to restrict. Are the EPA stepping in with brand new regulations? I understand they withheld the new regulations until after the re-election, so now they can impose stricter regulations on the burning of coal, the mining of coal, the drilling of oil, and the whole thing about fracking, which, it's evil, allegedly, is actually they want to eliminate it because they believe it scours the land in a manner that's not environmentally neutral.
Well, who knows exactly. Fracking, there's done studies. There's been some allegations that it has contaminants. That's not really been shown scientifically, but it does, anytime you're doing energy production, you're going to have some spills on the surface, whether you really have a problem going through the, when you're reaching down through those aquifers, that's another issue. But I think that, if you look at it, Obama didn't, he didn't take very, very many campaign contributions from oil and coal and uranium, so he's not going to favor those folks. And the ones who are doing the solar and wind, they'll do quite well.
Yeah, well, they did quite well during the first 4 years to the tune of several billion dollars in, supported government loans. And many of those companies went under. And is this going to be another repeat of money just going out to companies that are environmentally friendly and bundlers for the president just to go under? Is that a prediction you have?
I don't think they'll go under now. I mean, why go under? They can keep getting infused with money. So I think there's unlimited cash coming their way.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, the problem with that is there's the use of, once again, solar, wind, and I don't even know what other natural energy sources they're going to come up with. Maybe algae. Algae is the big one. I think what's going to happen here is that, once again, we're going to see a series of boondoggles, high-value boondoggles with government-backed loans that will produce nothing except for the bundlers for the current administration. But what else is going to happen?
Well, I think you've got a bad attitude. You and your
I have a bad attitude?
You and your corporate jets. People want to invest in the future, and they want to invest in solar and algae and these kind of things.
But the only problem is, how many cars are driven by solar?
Well,
None. How many cars are driven by algae?
None.
And so how many cars are driven by wind?
Well, we're talking about the future.
In
another 50 years or something.
Yeah, but what happens between day one, which could be today, and 50 years from now, when maybe something comes together?
Well, people will be hitchhiking.
Hitchhiking. Well,
or they'll pay like $10, $15 a gallon for gas.
The only problem with that is that energy is very abundant. It's already been shown that the great lie of that we have a finite fuel source, oil sources. That's a propaganda that was started by the oil companies so that they could drive up their own prices, and that started 100 years ago. But I think what's going to happen is the country's going to have to fail energy-wise and have to spend more money on importing energy just for maybe to get the impression on this administration that importing fuel does not mean that's the way to go into the future.
Well, we'll see. I think you have a bad attitude about this. Wind energy may work out, solar energy may work out. Now, how about the Supreme Court?
Well, there's a problem with the Supreme Court because there are several justices that are probably going to be replaced. And this election could have set the tone for the Supreme Court to be a more even-handed and more of a strict constructionist as compared to the living document that the progressives have always pushed for. There are many progressives that say that the Constitution is old. It's a fragile document that needs to be broken and brought into the mainstream. What that really means is that they want to rewrite it under terminology and under ideologies that were not part of the original foundation of this country. That's the fear I have about the Supreme Court. even though Justice Ginsburg, who's has many health problems, and I believe, let's see, we have some others. We have Justice Scalia that's out there, Justice Thomas. There's some problems on both sides. But with another 4 years, we're going to have to hope that the believers in the Constitution stay alive and they stay long enough in the Supreme Court. So with that happy note, I think we should move on to our second segment. And what is that, Mark?
Okay, we're talking about Fisher versus the University of Texas.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, there was a student applied to the University of Texas. She was white, and she didn't get in, and she claimed it was a reverse discrimination.
Well, what is reverse discrimination, Mark?
Well, that is when someone who's not a protected class, right, who's not, have the history of being discriminated against, they end up getting discriminated against, because they're not a protected class.
Well, I understand we have a caller on this, that somebody that studied these cases very well. And who is that, Mark?
Well, we have Ramona Babab coming on, and she's looked into this, and she's a student herself, so we thought we'd bring someone in who had some perspective, in that area.
Okay, is Ramona on?
Yes. Hello?
Good evening, Ramona. How are you?
Good. How are you?
We're doing really well. We really appreciate the time to come on to our show. So why don't you give us a brief background of this case and see if we can get a handle on it?
Yes. This case, the Fisher v. University of Texas, there were two students that applied to University of Texas, and they did not get in because university had some preferences on taking black students. They could not get into the university just because they were white, and there were some other black students that were not as qualified, and they got into the university. So they sued the university based on reverse discrimination, and the case went off to the Supreme Court, and we are waiting for the final decision by Supreme Court on this case. The importance of this case is that the result of the case, whether it's for Fisher or for University of Texas, would have an effect on affirmative action. So, if Supreme Court decides for Fisher, it's possible that affirmative action could not be exercised throughout the universities. And if University of Texas wins, it would give more value to affirmative action.
Ramona, my understanding is, wasn't there something in this case where when a student was applying, on top of their application on the first page, it said what their race was?
Yes. As a matter of fact, one of the matters that the Supreme Court judges were noticing, and university later confessed to that, was on the cover page of the application, before the application starts, they were asking about the race of the student.
So don't you think, Ramona, don't you think that's a good way for the university to promote diversity? So, when people go to a university, they get experience from different cultures, and you have diverse races, you have diverse cultures there. And so what's the problem with the university, looking at this and saying, the front page of the application and saying, okay, this person's of this, of this race, and then taking that into consideration to who they admit?
Because, the race would then have the main effect on the rest of the application, meaning that a person that's looking to the application would consider race as the main factor in accepting or not accepting the application. And, this is discrimination based on race.
But wait, excuse me, Ramona, I have a question for you on this, though. Doesn't the school have a motivation to serve the community and to balance the students that they admit to their campus?
Well, what happened was the university did multiple things that, the Supreme Court judges thought was a discrimination and was against, the equal protection we have in Constitution. One was, we just discussed that they were asking about race on the very first page, or on the cover page. The second was that they were trying to, to put more, students from certain races together in classes, and they would conduct surveys asking questions such as, do you feel isolated? From minor students or, certain races, they would ask them whether they feel isolated in the campus. So Supreme Court decided or thought that what they were doing was actually racial discrimination. And
okay, so Ramona, what you're saying is they had a program, kind of a follow-up program, because they were going in there, because isn't it true that some people have argued that, like, say someone gets admitted, like say someone gets extra points or extra consideration because of their race, and then they get into the university and they have a hard time competing. Isn't this something, a mismatching? Isn't that an issue that comes up sometimes?
Oh, of course. Accepting people based on their race and making it a major factor in accepting or not accepting them, is not a very scientific way of admitting people.
So, but isn't this survey in this program? Wasn't that survey in a way to try to follow up and try to mitigate that mismatching problem somewhat? Maybe mitigate that, so even there was a little mismatching, then they could come in, maybe mentor those students or help them and give them a hand so that the mismatching didn't become a problem. How could you think that's a bad thing?
To help students to get into certain programs because they are from certain race. Do you think was that your question?
Well, what I'm saying is, okay, sometimes it seems to me that this survey was meant to follow up on people who got in maybe because of a preference, right? And they wanted to make sure they're doing okay, so they didn't feel isolated and left out. And there is, and I don't know if that was in response to mismatching, but I think it might well be. So how would you argue that that's a bad thing? Wouldn't that be a way of kind of helping that problem?
Well, this, what they were doing, asking students, whether you are, whether you feel isolated, and putting them into certain classes to, to match the racial demographics of their classes with the racial demographics of the state. The Supreme Court said that, first, what you are doing is problematic. It is considering race as a main factor in, putting students together in a class. And secondly, you are claiming that what you're trying to do is matching the racial demographic of the university with the racial demographic of the state. And the state of Texas has 1% black population. And these universities, and this university had, well over 1% black population.
Okay, Ramona, I wanted to thank you for coming on the show tonight, and I really appreciate all the input. And we're going to watch this to see how this turns out. But Mark, let's move on to our third subject.
Okay, our third subject today is the Benghazi attack. And this is a big issue now because it came up before the election, and then it was kind of put on the back burner for the election. And now Congress is looking into these issues and seeing if there wasn't some mishandling on what happened over there in Libya.
We're talking about Benghazi, Libya, and we're talking about the U.S. consulate. It's a little bigger than what's being portrayed in the mainstream media. But what's happened is in Benghazi, Libya, we had an outpost. It was actually, Benghazi is actually the most renegade part of Libya. And our consulate, which are normally surrounded by bulletproof walls, armed Marines, literally tanks and anti-personnel weapons, it was a country club home that they acquired from the government. It was given to them out of some largesse. And then there was just a small wall built around it. This compound had been attacked twice in the 6 months prior to that night in Benghazi. And what had happened was our Ambassador Stevens was requesting more security after the attacks. The Red Cross and the British consulate had emptied themselves already because of the violence in the area. Because Benghazi is a Wild West type state in Libya, not even the government soldiers that were stationed there were willing to put up a fight to protect our ambassador.
Okay, so do you think the Muslims will ever forgive us for putting on that YouTube video that incited a mob that killed our ambassador? I mean, can we apologize enough to the Muslim people and say we should have never put that video on? Because if we hadn't put that video on, as I guess who came on?
Well,
Susan Rice came on.
Susan Rice, our ambassador to the UN.
And the president said several times
in the UN,
we were sorry for this video because that video incited the mob. The mob killed our ambassador, which is an act of war, invaded the embassy. And, you know, how can we really expect those people to forgive us for, like, pushing them into assassinating our ambassador?
Well,
can we ever live through that guilt?
Well,
that's the question.
This is the mystery of the Benghazi story. And I'm not going to claim to have all the answers to this story. But what I am
at least the main thing is we did put the YouTube guy in jail.
Yes, funny enough that the administration immediately arrested the YouTube, and he's back in prison. But what's interesting about this is that the day after, the president of Libya said it had nothing to do with any video. He said, what video? It was all about an Al-Qaeda-linked organization that literally attacked the compound with some odd 60, 70 men with secondary fire, mortar fire. They came in with machine guns, rocket-propelled grenades, and they knew the compound.
No, I'm confused. Now you're saying that there was a video of a terrorist attack on the embassy?
Well, actually, it was live. The Secretary of State's department was watching the attack live on cameras that were stationed at the video.
They weren't watching the YouTube video that was insulting the Muslims.
No, they weren't watching any YouTube video. In fact, there was no spontaneous riot over a YouTube video.
I thought the State Department was watching the YouTube video.
No, the State Department was watching the attack on the embassy, and instead of calling in the Marines, CIA, Air Force, from numerous locations surrounding Benghazi, including right 1 hour away in both in Tripoli, we had armed groups. In Europe, we had armed groups.
No, in Sicily. In Sicily. Yeah, in Sicily, you have the Delta Force at the Sigali Air Base. That's 480 miles away. I think they get there about an hour.
An hour.
And I guess the firefight went on for about 6 hours.
No, it actually went on for almost 8 hours.
8 hours. But I mean, if you're watching, that YouTube video was probably pretty long. Maybe it was a trailer. It was like 30, 40 minutes. So let's say
the entire YouTube video was like 7 minutes.
Well, let's say you watch. Okay, so 7 minutes. So it went on for 8 hours. So let's say you watched the thing 10. So basically, the State Department was watching the YouTube video of maybe 80 times or something.
Well, let's go back to reality here. The reality was the president of Libya said it was an Al-Qaeda-linked group the day after. The CIA has reports that it was an Al-Qaeda-linked group the day after. And then 5 days later, and interestingly enough, somehow the prop called Susan Rice, who was an ambassador to the UN, decided by somebody's order to go on 5 news shows and say it's all about the video that most people never even saw, never even heard of until they started promoting it. And what's the most terrible part is even the president went to the UN 2 weeks later and said, oh, it's about the video. We're so sorry that somebody in our country would be so disrespectful.
But I mean, can we expect to be forgiven by the people?
Oh, we hope to be forgiven
by the people,
and that's why we're selling our souls to the Middle East. But the problem is that's not the problem.
So the issue is like, was this on some? No, but I mean, you know,
we have conflicting timelines.
No, but the thing about this, you know, this is a surprise mob thing caused by a video.
There was no surprise mob.
Well, this is a surprise thing caused by a YouTube video. Now, why would anyone expect an attack to happen on the date it happened?
Well, you know what's funny about that, Mark?
What's that?
It was 9/11.
Oh, the anniversary of 9/11?
Oh, the anniversary of 9/11.
You're kidding.
Oh,
mysteries. You're kidding.
Mysteries never cease.
You're kidding. Okay.
The worst part is that in 9/11, prior to this administration, every consulate around the world would be more fortified because of 9/11. What
but,
that meant.
But I'm sure they beefed up this Benghazi.
No, they
consulate.
cleared the security
I'm
out.
Sure I'm sure they beefed it up because, you know, if there was warnings and the consulate had asked for more
yeah.
protection, I'm sure it was a beefed up security.
No, in fact, what they have is cables from Ambassador Stevens, who was the ambassador killed. He was
a little more than killed, wasn't he? They did some stuff.
He was murdered.
Well, it was a little bit more than murder.
Well, there's theories of what really happened to him, but those haven't been officially released yet.
Okay.
But here's what happened. There was multiple CIA operatives that were a mile away. They were told to stand down. No, don't go. So instead, the two brave CIA ex-SEALs went to save the ambassador.
I thought there were 3 SEALs.
No, there was one SEAL that was located on the other side, but there was 2 that came across town. They disobeyed direct orders not to be involved, and they went to save the ambassador. And they actually saved about 25 people. But unfortunately, the ambassador and the 3 SEALs. Well, it was an intel officer, which is CIA, in the consulate. There was Ambassador Stevens and 2 Navy SEAL CIA operatives that were killed. There was 4 killed. There was approximately 14 wounded, and many were saved. And the CIA operatives that came across town saved those people. That's something the press isn't talking about. What's so scary about
this?
Wait
a minute. We have freedom of the press. But so the First Amendment's important. So we have the freedom of the press. So the press didn't the press find some things after the investigation?
Well,
like
actually,
4 or 5 days?
CNN went back. The FBI said, we can't go. It's too dangerous. So the CNN the news company went back to the consulate, and they found the diaries. They found secret documents just laying around because, hey, the terrorists didn't know what they wanted. They didn't know what they were looking for. They just wanted to kill somebody. And it was 9/11. Oh, mystery.
Okay, but wait a minute. I mean, the First Amendment is good sometimes, but the First Amendment, this YouTube thing, that's the reason that the First Amendment shouldn't protect
First
this.
First of all, the YouTube thing shouldn't even be under question here.
No, but I mean,
in this country, we can make any video we want to make.
But it shouldn't.
If it shows Muhammad smoking dope, it doesn't matter.
Well, wait a minute. No, the First Amendment shouldn't protect someone who's insulting a religion, right?
Yes, it can.
You're kidding.
No, I'm not. Maybe under this regime we don't know that, but the First Amendment says I can make a video doing anything.
No, but I thought if you were insulting, Muslims,
Muhammad?
Yeah, I thought if you were doing that, the First Amendment doesn't cover that.
I'm sorry, Mark, it doesn't cover that.
Yeah,
it doesn't cover that at all.
I didn't think it covered.
And here's the problem. The question lies in one area.
And exactly
it's not so much the act on 9/11, the ambassador being killed. And we have to end it with this, but I'm just going to say this. It's not so much the ambassador being killed, it's the cover-up that always gets people in trouble. That's what Watergate, that's what Iran-Contra, and that's what it's all about tonight on Law Talk.
Yeah,
so listen, we'll look forward to seeing you next month, and I'll tell you, there's a lot more going on